Yo, internet, what's going on with y'all? This week I was scouring Audible's new releases and it belched up Promise You'll Wait, a Cornish wartime story. Obviously I have no clue what this is, so let's just dive on into it. Beware, because spoilers be lurking ahead. So we pick up with a girl named Rosemary and her courtship-worthy friend, Danny, in the middle of World War II London. For those of us who got a D and above in history, we understand why somebody like this might actually appreciate the simple things in life. For example, a decent restaurant with tables outside. It's a decent way to show us that the character appreciates things and the state of the way she's used to living. Not a bad opening. I do have to knock off a few points though, because we're told that she is a plain, simple girl whose appeal lay in her honest and straightforward approach. Now, as a character design, I suppose that's all good and fine. Promise is that this is all full of tell, don't show. While it's a little difficult to show us that she's plain, it's certainly not impossible, and we really should see her being blunt and straightforward in a yet charming and endearing way, especially as it mentions that these qualities are what attracted Danny to her. Why didn't we get to see any of that? Also, this may be a personal preference, but the author's style is very, very dry in this opening. It almost reads like a history book, and I've never really cared for that type of style. It just feels very impersonal, and given that you're trying to take us along on a journey, creating distance via this dry style just isn't a very good way of leading off. However, it's not wrong, per se, just not something that I personally care for. Like present tense writing. So we learn that Danny got close to Rosie in order to avoid marrying someone his mother had set him up with, and we get a little reminiscing back and forth between them. It's a decent enough moment and shows us that they're friends. We also learn a bit of the details on how the country is being affected by the war, such as women being allowed to work jobs that were previously men's jobs because the men are all fighting. They have a little bit of a moment of a sweet teasing back and forth, and it comes to a bittersweet moment, as Rosie reflects that they're getting married because Danny is a pilot in the Air Force and they both understand that he just might not come back sooner or later. It's immediately sombering and touching, and is also something you can completely understand given their situation. This is a character-driven moment. It's great. So as they're talking, they agree to be sure that they'll always come back to this spot on the 27th of July as a pilgrimage to see one another. In reality, of course, they're both promising not to be killed in the war, as well as Danny using this moment to propose to her. It's a bit cliche, but once you're inside of a maple tree sap, it really doesn't bother you so much. And it's not a bad maple tree, once you're in it. I'm not sure what I'm on about either. Of course, it being wartime, things do not go happy. Danny is declared MIA before they can get married. Rosemary falls into a depression and throws herself into her work at the factory, and tries to get out of her mother's house as often as she can. Decent depiction of someone suffering from a form of heartbreak. So we see deeper into Rosemary's family. We see her mother's concern for her daughters, and her sister's desire to bag an American soldier and live an overly idealistic American life. I know I said that the opening was a bit dry, but this has made it go completely the other way around. Now the writing is wet? Yeah, I don't like that. It's damp. It's moist. What do we think?
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
Okay, fine. It's decreed that now the opposite of dry writing is moist booking. Done. So, Rosie is chosen to hand off the Queen's flowery bouquet during her wedding ceremony. I genuinely have no clue if this is based on any actual history or not, but hey, I said D students are involved too, so, you know. But there's also a nice bit in here about how she's perceived by the working class, made all the more poignant by the Queen's actual passing in real life, although I don't give the author credit for that. This is actually really good to see, as it again gives Rosie a little more depth. She then has a small panic because she fears forgetting Danny's face, which is also a factor. Many people, once they lose somebody, think about them every day, and then slowly that becomes every week, and eventually you only think of them once every few months, or even years, and that can lead to a small bit of guilt and confusion. This is also decent character work, and I like it. Which is weird, because I'm pretty sure I just admitted that I like a depressing book and called it moist. We then move to Danny, who survived his horrible plane crash, which honestly surprised me, and he gets... rescued isn't the right word, but he gets picked up by a group of sympathetic Dutch people who hide him away in a basement. While they heal him, he suffers a lot of memory loss and starts to catch feelings for the Dutch girl who was healing him. Back in England, Rosemary's sister Gracie went partying with the American boys and winds up pregnant and begins bemoaning her ruined future. It creates a juxtaposition to Rosemary, who is being recognized by the Queen for creating the most parachutes in the English Isles. So things move on and we see Danny recover more and more of his memory, enough to remember Rosie, so yay! Meanwhile, Rosie is quickly being turned into something of a publicity figure, and a creepy photographer wants to take photos of her. Allegedly for propaganda. I do have a critique to levy against the book at this point, which is a change because we were really moist booking it up for a while, and yes, I am now married to that term. The author writes in what's referred to as third-person omniscient. This means we are reading a story about someone else, but the central character changes and we follow different people more closely and often see different musings or thoughts. This is actually great for all the Danny and Rosie stuff. Full marks, no issue there. It's a bit off-putting when we suddenly jump to the mother or Gracie's point of view, but that's still followable. However, we jump to the photographer's thoughts literally in the middle of the shoot and without warning, and it's a very big lurch. Even one that drew me right out of my maple tree, if I can refer to my earlier very weird analogy. Anyhow, the photographer tries to R-word Rosie and she breaks his nose in camera. Good girl. Then, Danny gets picked up by a man from the British Air Force and begins heading back to England. However, at this point, we're less than a fifth of the way through this book, so I don't feel like I'm going to have a happily ever after. So from here, the story jumps back and forth as Danny tries to find Rosie, and Rosie tries to keep things in her own life put together during the wartime. They both have other people that are at least interested in them romantically, and I didn't want to think we were doing this. This is a really stupid trope that I hate, and so I figured, no, surely we're not doing this. But Danny finds Rosie's factory at the exact moment Rosie is visiting her sister, in like the same 4-day period. Her boss says that she's, quote, gone. In fact, he repeats it twice and doesn't clarify because he's in a hurry. I absolutely hate this trope. It's one of the stupidest contrivances to make a character think someone is dead. It's dumb. It's dumb and it ruins it. I was in like Flynn, man. I was enjoying the story. The book was moisting all over the place, and you ruined it with one overly dumb, contrived choice. The worst part is that now I can see where we're going, and I don't like it. We were so close. Damn it. So as time moves on, and my pain for the stupidly cliched hydra of inconvenience that reared its ugly heads has slowly sunk back down beneath the waves as Danny and Rosie both move on with their lives. They help out in the war effort in different ways and end up fucking people they don't really love due to an unrequited love relationship, which makes them both feel like manipulators. Don't get me wrong, the Hydra of Inconvenience was definitely the low point of this book, but it's just a little less moist after the Hydra has appeared. Look, it's 4 in the morning as I'm typing this sentence, which means that it's either brilliant or stupid, and once I went back to edit the script, I was too stubborn to change it. So, as time marches on, Rosie and Danny essentially move on with their lives and find some joy, even though they never find
true love
or
knowledge.
So Rosie goes to the pier where she and Danny agreed to meet, and finds a young man who turns out to be Danny's son, and Danny is, quote, gone due to a stroke. It's a weird moment because while she does grieve for him, she also gets over his death relatively quickly. I would expect the book to end here. You know, Rosie never finds true love, but she gets something of a surrogate son in Danny's son. Except there's still a few hours of book left. This is because the book pulls a sneaky fuck you. Rosie assumes Danny's dead because of, you know, a stroke. But he's actually survived the stroke and is trying to make a recovery, so maybe we'll get to see something of an ending. So I've been bouncing back and forth on whether or not I like this book, and I've just decided. Turns out I don't! It tried. It really tried, and as much as I mentioned it moist booking, it does a lot of not okay. In particular, Rosie finds out that Danny is still alive and goes to visit him and is freaking out. That's all fine. However, 2 side characters end up pointing out how amazing Rosie is, and how she's so much better than Miss Havisham from Great Expectations, because she worked hard as an independent woman and did so many great things with her life. Listen, if you want to have a badass woman moment, you go for it. Love strong women, but don't preach at me about doing it, and certainly don't pat yourself on the back for it. Then you just come off as preachy and condescending. I'm having a hard time enjoying being talked down to by a book. Can't imagine why. It's also worth mentioning that both Rosie and Danny have had people that they're close to interact with the other person's close people. Like a lot. Like the best friend Danny makes after coming back to England ends up marrying Rosie's adoptive sister. They acknowledge how spooky this is. But pointing out your insane unlikelihood does not make them better, book. Then Rosie calls it Destiny, which I'm considering enough to mark off on the bingo card. This book is going on and on and on, and I still have almost an hour left. Again, being long is not the same thing as feeling long. Way of Kings is a long-ass book, but I don't remember it feeling long. This feels long, even though it's only about 11 hours in an audiobook. The end comes, and it's what you would expect. What I found a little funny is at the very end of the book, they say to the reader directly, if this has you reaching for the tissue box, then you'll love this book. What if I found the book almost good, but ended up finding it incredibly annoying? What book will I love then? My personal score is 4 out of 10. There's some goodness in there, but it's mostly overlong cliche, full of fake outs, which gets really old, and just there's a lot of what there shouldn't be. Let's go ahead and take a look at that bingo card. And we were all over this bingo card like Will Smith on Chris Rock. That being said, I'm amazed how often we actually filled the space, that we only hit bingo twice. That's somehow impressive in its own right. Anyhow, that's all for this time, so if you have something else you want me to review, go ahead and leave a comment down below, let me know. If you want to see what we get into next time, go ahead and subscribe. Until then, drink plenty of water, tell your parents that you love them, and stroke your mustache at night. Wow.